Hello, everyone. Welcome to Deprogrammed. I think we're live. Keri, hi. How you doing?
Hi, I'm good. A little sleepy, but I'm good.
All right. And
But this Peggy McIntosh has me excited.
she does. We've been wanting to do this I feel like we've been wanting to do a lot of things like this, at least. Maybe not this particular thing, but we've been wanting to do a lot of things like this for a while. And it's a great opportunity to just kind of, honestly, one of the things that got me thinking more about this, Keri, was that we were doing the things at the end of our Kofefi shows, reading the knapsack article. I was like, I really should talk about this rather than just read it because it's so horrible.
It's a great idea to do that, by the way.
Thank you for doing this. So today, everyone, first of all, welcome. Thank you for joining. I see someone's already in chat, which is great.
Oh, Gracie.
Yeah. Please don't forget to subscribe, share, go to Subscribestar if you have cash that's burning a hole in your pocket. Otherwise, just pass it around and help get the word out. Also, we have shirts and stuff like that. There's merch at unsafespace.com if you really want to support us that much, including an awesome shirt. Yes.
Also, we are doing a book club, Unsafe Space book club. And the first book we're reading is Brave New World. We're going to be doing a group discussion. We'll figure out how to do a discussion sometime the first week of August. So
I think we have a date set.
We have a date set.
I don't know what it is, but we have a date.
We set August 3rd, but we'll August 3rd, sometime.
Oh, you want to change it because of your work schedule?
I might have to change it. We'll see. Hopefully, but we set it at night, so I might not have to.
Instead of saying, well, we might.
Anyway, you've got until the first week of August to read Brave New World and then join us for a discussion, which will be fun. Can I set up what we're doing today? Because I have something to say.
Please, yeah, you're the expert on social justice.
So I'm excited, harder to talk about this today because this white privilege is one of the cornerstones of SJW ideology. And it is the concept from which intersectionality kind of arose. They kind of arose together, but it combines some of the same ideas as intersectionality. It is the root of a lot of the other concepts in SJW belief system that have come since then, like white fragility, unconscious bias. All of these things sprung out of the concept of white privilege. And white privilege used to be something that was talked about. It was an academic concept. It came out of this essay we're going to talk about, this paper that Peggy McIntosh wrote, and was an experiential piece of work, right? And it all came from that. And what's interesting to me now is that it's left academia, it has infiltrated the mainstream, and now it's treated as if it's a fact. This belief is a fact. And so I'm just really happy that we're going to go through it step by step and kind of take it apart for people that may not know where it came from.
Yeah. And let's be clear, when you say it's an experiential thing, it's not scientific. This is a woman who wrote a bunch of her opinions down about how she felt about things and therefore what might be happening with no evidence, and just kind of barfed onto a page, mostly driven by what I believe to be her own guilt of economic privilege, which we can talk about. And that has been given legitimacy because it was done in a university setting and among academics. And now it is passed around as if this is some sort of intellectual exercise. And it's no more legitimate than asking your fourth grader how they feel about life at school. There's no legitimacy to this. This is simply her feelings about some stuff. That's all it is.
And now, 30 years later, you will see people in discussions use this white privilege. Well, you must not know about white privilege. Oh, as if it is truth.
Right. It's like saying you must not know about Peggy McIntosh's imaginary friend. I don't have to know about Peggy's imaginary friends. That's not a thing. It's not a thing. Keri, I don't know if you want to be the one to do this, but I looked up some details because I suspected you had said she came from wealth, and I was like, I wonder if that's true. So I looked up some stuff. Do you know some information, or would you like me to say?
I think you can start to get into it, but I just wanted to credit, first of all, there's a great Quillette piece called Unpacking Peggy McIntosh's Knapsack.
That's what I was going to start with.
Okay. So I think, we should credit William Ray because he did a great job with pointing out how privileged this woman was growing up.
Yeah. So I was going to read the first couple paragraph and a half of William Ray's piece in Quillette, which we can link to. And then I did some independent research on some stuff. So just a few little things. Mm-hmm. So William writes, Peggy, this is just to give you an idea of who this woman is. Peggy McIntosh was born Elizabeth Vance Means in 1934. She grew up in Summit, New Jersey, where the median income is quadruple the American national average. That is to say that half the incomes there are more than 4 times the national average, some of them substantially so. McIntosh's father was Winthrop J. Means, the head of Bell Laboratories' electronic switching department during the late 1950s. At that time, Bell Labs were the world leaders in nascent digital computing revolution. Means personally held and sold patents on many very lucrative technologies, including early magnetic gyro compass equipment, which now helps to guide nuclear missiles and commercial jets, and which keeps satellites in place, blah, blah, blah. Means is also recorded as the inventor of a patent held by Nokia Bell in 1959, known as the Information Storage Arrangement. This device is the direct progenitor to ROM computer memory and is cited in the latest patent filed in 1965 for IBM. So long before Peggy McIntosh wrote her paper, her family was already having an outsized effect on Western culture. And then he goes on to talk about her college, but before we get to her college, I looked up her elementary school because Peggy McIntosh went to 2 separate private schools prior to going to college. The first was called Kent Place School. Now, we don't know how much Kent Place School cost back when she went, but we can compare it how much it costs today to maybe how much you might spend on your child's education, who's in grades 6 to 12. Tuition at Kent Place School is $41,950 a year. So that's not just private school, that's expensive private school. And I'm saying that as a dad in the Bay Area in California. $41,950 that's a pricey one. That's not a cheap private school. Then she went to George School, which was founded in 1887. It's a Quaker school. And the tuition there, it's a boarding school, the tuition and board there is $61,250. So I would go out on a limb and say she was a child of a family of some means. Let's just put it that way. And then to go back to
go back to the piece. Can I pick up here for a second?
Yeah, it's with the sentence about Radcliffe.
Yeah, she went on to attend Radcliffe. Do you want me to read the whole thing or?
What's up to you? I was going to read the next couple sentences, but whatever.
A renowned finishing school for the daughters of America's patrician elites, and continued her private education at the University of London, ranked in the top 50, blah, blah, blah. She completed her English doctorate at Harvard. She got engaged to this fancy doctor, and her wedding was announced in the New York Times social pages. And it goes on and on. She was in the upper, as this guy says in the article, upper elite, aristocratic elite. And she's remained there ever since. So this list of things that she thinks of as white privilege, just keep in mind her personal individual background.
Yep. And by the way, personal background is not an argument. I'm not claiming it's an argument. But she doesn't make any arguments. So this really isn't about arguments. This is about understanding her perspective.
Yeah.
Keri, how do you want to start? Do you want to start reading this essay? What do you want to do?
I think we should go through the essay and just kind of take it apart. Yeah. There is one more thing I wanted to point out in this Colette piece, if you don't mind. There was one sentence that I really loved, and we can come back to this later too if we want to. He pointed out that she basically took, I'm looking for it. She took her experiences growing up in this upper crust, like elite community, and she shared them with, here he says, here it is, da 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 da. But even though the lifetime of privilege McIntosh has experienced is almost certainly due to her wealth and not the color of her skin, she nevertheless found a way to share this irksome burden with the illiterate children of Kentucky coal miners, the hopeless peasants of the Appalachians, poor single mothers struggling to make ends meet on welfare, and the vast majority of whites in the United States and throughout the world who never had the chance to attend Radcliffe or Harvard. I thought that was it's a great sentence, because that's exactly what she does. She shares her elite privilege with an entire group of people.
Actually, she only shares the burden of it. She doesn't really share the privilege.
That's true. Sorry. Thank you for catching. Yeah. I need to speak more slowly so I'm articulating correctly. Yes. She shares the burden of the privilege, but not the actual privilege.
Yes. Yes, she does. These people. So, Keri, I printed it out. I got little notes and everything. So I'm an old man. I printed it out and wrote notes.
I've got notes in a little notebook.
All right.
Okay.
So I don't know. How do you want to? Do you want to just start reading this? We don't have time to read every sentence and comment on every sentence.
Right. I think we should put it up on the screen for a little bit and go through some of it. But I just want to say one other thing, because this is one of the foundational beliefs of SJW ideology. This text, this experiential paper of hers, this is like let's compare it to the Bible. This is a sacred text within this belief system. And yet most of the people who preach this now, because it has become viral and gone outside of academia, and now it's become this mainstream thing. Most people have never even read it. They're quoting from a sacred SJW text that they haven't actually looked at.
Just like the Bible.
Hey, yeah, you're right. A lot of people will quote from the Bible without reading it. That's true.
That wasn't meant to be a dig on the Bible.
No, it's meant to be a dig on people who
Okay,
let's go.
So I have some notes about this first paragraph, but we should read the first paragraph just to like set a context though. So she writes, through work to bring materials from women's studies into the rest of the curriculum. We can pause right there. So she's already in women's studies. This, by the way, is the reason this is one of the reasons why Barbara Kay, who we interviewed previously, said that the origin of a lot of this intersectional social justice crap is feminism, right? Because this is where it came from.
Yeah, she wrote this paper in 1989. It's called White Privilege, Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack. But what led to it was a paper she wrote the year before, which was called White Privilege and Male Privilege. And that was squarely about like, this is what I know about male privilege. And now it's opened up some things that I'm realizing about white privilege. And it led to this.
Right. So she says, yeah, through work to bring materials from women's studies into the rest of the curriculum. God, I have often noticed men's unwillingness to grant that they are overprivileged, even though they may grant that women are disadvantaged. They may say they will work to women's statues. It really says statues. Is this the right? Okay. In society, the university, or the curriculum, but they can't or won't support the idea of lessening men's. Denials that amount to taboos surround the subject of advantages that men gain from women's advantages. These denials project male privilege from being fully acknowledged, lessened, or ended. Keri, I've got just a couple notes on this one already. I don't know if you got anything to say about this paragraph.
Go ahead.
So there's a few things I hate about this right away. And these roots are shared with feminism. So first of all, this idea of privilege itself shifts blame to an innocent third party. So if there are men who are misogynistic and sexist, of which I'm sure there are, and probably many more back in 1989 or 88 when she first was doing that work, they are the ones to blame. It's not other people don't, it's not privilege that they have because they're not doing anything. It's not their privilege that there's someone who's, how do I want to say this? Blacks who aren't slaves prior to the Civil War, blacks who weren't slaves weren't privileged because they weren't slaves. Slave owners were evil and should not have owned slaves and were guilty, but calling blacks who weren't slaves privileged shifts blame away from the slave owner to the people who are innocent third parties. And that's the purpose of using the word privileged. Why she likes privilege is she wants everyone to feel guilt. This is her thing of spreading the guilt around. Oh, I know you're not doing anything, but you're privileged because bad things aren't happening to you. Therefore, you're privileged. And so I hate the concept. The other thing I want to say is this mentality, and this one I think is really important to notice because I think it's a fundamental difference between how one type of person views the world and how another type of person views the world. This is a zero-sum outlook on the world. So this is the idea that if you have something, then I don't have it. There's a pizza to go around, and if Keri has too many slices, I'm left with a box. That's what the zero-sum mentality is. Now, in reality, none of us have anything. Nature hates you. Nature hates us. Nature, it does not provide things. So in reality, things are created. And so it's not that there's a pizza, and if I have too many slices, you get a box. It's that I might make a pizza, but me making a pizza doesn't take away from you making a pizza also. It's not, life is not a zero-sum game. Society is not a zero-sum game. We haven't just shifted resources around since Stone Age.
This is like when you explain the concept of work to me. So this is an entirely separate conversation, but we should do a video on this at some point because it reminds me of, and SJWs, I think a lot of times haven't heard this, which is the creation of value. When you were kind of telling me, like, if I create something and sell it and make $100, I didn't take that $100 from you. I made something.
Right. And that's demonstrably true because it's not like if you rewind 2,000 years ago, we had all the same stuff, but differently distributed. Clearly, we've created stuff. So life is not a zero-sum game. And this idea that she's got here of, and she's going to get into it further, but she talks about this privilege, and she acts as if one person has agency, it therefore decreases other people's agency. And that is a false premise to start out with right away. That's all I wanted to say.
Wow. Do you mean she's starting all this on a faulty premise?
I know. Okay. Wow. My privilege just makes it impossible for me to understand.
I want to point out something from a former SJW's point of view here. A lot of times people ask, how do they get you to buy all this stuff, right? Well, it's piece by piece. And so you can see that at the beginning of this article. She's like, well, as a woman, it's easier to convince her as a woman that there's a system of oppression that's still ongoing, that men have privilege and she doesn't because they have privilege. And for her to start to look at everything through that lens and to say, well, that happened. And actually sometimes, yes, this happened because of sexism. This man was sexist and he said this and blah, blah, blah. Or I didn't get this job because I think that dude was. Sometimes, yes, it is sexism, but it's not sexism every time. And what this tells you is that it is, and that you have no agency. And once they've convinced you of that, and it's easy to do it when it's something that relates to you, right? Like, so she's a woman. It's easy. First, she's convinced that there's this hierarchy in which men are born, all men have innate male privilege and women don't have, and there's no privileges to being female in any context. That's what you accept first. Once you've done that, then she says, oh, then I was able to see how race is like that too. And I am in the privileged category, white, and everyone else does not have privilege because I do. So it's step by step. And then once you've seen that, then it's like, oh, they basically take this and they apply it to all of these groups, all these marginalized and privileged groups. So then they move it into queer theory and then into fat studies. And then, it just keeps going.
Yeah. Yeah. And she it costs her very little to say, well, I have some white privilege and I'm going to write about it, because her status, her economic status, and her academic status, it doesn't really cost her much to do this. Whereas some of the less advantaged people that are white that you mentioned earlier, like coal miners, it actually has a bigger impact on them. This is a tax that Peggy McIntosh can afford.
Yeah.
But not everyone can.
On that note, I just wanted to show you guys something real quick, because this relates directly to what you just said, the cost on poor whites. There was a study that just came out, this paper published in the Journal of Experimental Psychology, which said that the idea of white privilege doesn't actually make, when you teach liberals about this concept of white privilege, it doesn't actually make them more empathetic, or more empathetic towards Black people or people of color, but it actually, the one impact they're seeing is that it's making people less empathetic towards poor white people.
Right. Not
Isn't
surprising.
that interesting? Yeah.
Not surprising. Yeah. It really is. And, that's kind of the economic class that Trump won in his election. That's kind of the demographic, is the lower quote, lower class whites.
Right. One example of that, again, not to get too far afield, but I think it's good to just mention it because this just happened. There was this SUNY professor who, if you guys look it up, I can't find it right now, but the SUNY professor who basically said that when he sees a poor white person, it makes him happy. And that he views poor white people as people who have wasted their white privilege. That's a professor. These are the people teaching your kids.
Right. So I know we want to get to she's got 50 things here. So I know we want to get to them, but is there anything else kind of before this, Keri, before she gets to her 50 daily effects of white privilege that you want to talk about? There's one that I want to point out, but not too much other than that.
You go ahead and I'm going to look at my notes.
Well, the one I want to point out is a few paragraphs down. Oops, this isn't showing. Let me. So she uses this word power. She says, as we in women's studies work to reveal male privilege and ask men to give up some of their power, so one who writes about having white privilege must ask, having described it, what will I do to lessen or end it? And I want to highlight the word power because this is again a through line. It's a problem with both feminism and intersectionality generally, and that is this unhealthy focus on a particular type of power. So it is true that historically men have been in positions of political power, economic power, which is really just workplace power, right? If you want to use the word power there, which is questionable. In the political realm, I think it's appropriate. In other realms, it's maybe less appropriate because it's not really power that's tied up with force in any way. But there are ways in which women have power in relationships, in controlling the ideology and mindset of children, which controls the mindset and ideology of the next generation, and therefore the cultural change generally. Women, no one stops to ask, well, what are the powers that women have had historically? And actually, I think what they're doing is they're focusing only on the things that men have, quote, power in, and arguing that is power. That is the end of power. That's all the power that matters, and we have to fight to get some. Rather than saying, well, what power have women had? Which is different from what power have men had. What have women been relied on to do or given authority over or had influence in? What do they get to do, right? So, for example, the one example I'll give is going to war. Women don't have to go die. They've never been asked to have to go die. They're never given a rifle and told to go defend their country. Never. Now, that's a certain amount of power / privilege / position in society that is superior to man's position. But their focus is purely on a particular type of power. And there's something unhealthy about that. And I think it opens Pandora's box to all of these other mistakes that you can make about analyzing the interactions between people in society. That's all I wanted to say before we get
that. Well, just to piggyback on that for anyone who this is the first time you watched one of our videos, maybe that's the center of SJW ideology is power. That's what they worship. If you think of it like a religion, and when an SJW dies, you will see them say rest in power instead of rest in peace. And they view all these different groups, right? All these different privileged versus marginalized groups as groups that are competing over power. So it's a really generalized way to think of it is it's like Marxism, but instead of groups competing over capital, over money, they're competing over the power that Carter's talking about.
Well, and in many ways, they're competing directly over the power of the gun. They're competing over controlling the state. This is why the left is so authoritarian, because the right, at least historically, a lot of the smaller government people have been on the right, and the smaller government people kind of don't want the state to have a lot of power. So there's not a lot to argue over. As long as they don't have a lot of power, it doesn't matter. There's not much power to wield. But if you've moved into this mindset in which the state has lots of power to do everything, then suddenly everyone needs to argue over who to point the gun at. And the leftists are very much about a large state, and therefore all of this argument between different groups and all of the strife associated with intersectionality is centered around who gets to hold the gun and point it at whom.
I hadn't thought about it that way before, but that's exactly what it is. It's about who gets to tell who what to do. Like it is very authoritarian in nature. And you'll see this even in the part that you just read. She's like, what can I do about it? Right. Or how can we be accountable for our power? This is where you will see, you may have heard some of these phrases where they say stuff like SJWs will say, stay in your lane, or white people need to shut up and listen, or men need to shut up and listen, or if you're someone in a privileged group, then they will say, you're invalidating my lived experience if you disagree with me. It's a way of controlling who gets to contribute to the conversation, who gets to share their thoughts and opinions. And it's a way of making people lower class and they view it as okay, because they view it as you are someone who's in this powerful group and you have power, and therefore you need to give up your power and shut up and let these other people tell you all of their opinions, but you can't say anything. And you'll notice this in some of the comments from Daily Covfefe yesterday. Anyway, people were like, oh, you're white people, you can't talk about this. Here's something very freeing. People sometimes ask us what to do. Talk about what you want to talk about. Don't let this, oh, you're white, oh, you can't speak, you can't talk, you can't have an opinion. Oh,
you know what, Keri?
You can't have an opinion on that.
Honestly, yesterday's episode was great for me because I think it was yesterday, the one that we had all the haters. It was the first time other than the weird trolls for the Josh Denny video who weren't really ideological, this was the first time we had like a lot of actual racists hating on it, like calling us racist, saying that we're white racists. It's a crazy low IQ intersectionalist people yelling at us on YouTube. And, what was great for me is it was the first time that I had reached this point in my life where I didn't care. I was like, oh yeah, I'm being called a racist. Like, no.
Yeah, I don't care.
Okay, that's your problem, not mine.
Their ideology is racist, and who cares if a racist projects and calls you racist because you're not. And I like the fact that they did all those comments because they illustrate perfectly how racist they are. Almost every comment is, well, you white people are blah blah blah, or white people are da da da. You are judging an entire group of people based on race. Thank you for illustrating what racism actually is. And it doesn't matter what their race is, but to judge an entire group of people like that and to say they would take any of those sentences in their comments and make it about any other race, and they would never do that.
No. And it's, the more you do it, it made me uncomfortable at first when people would say things like that about me or about us. And now you just have to do it a few times and then you're like, oh yeah, okay, I'm called racist.
Plus,
whatever.
because they've used it so much and so inaccurately, and lobbed it at so many people in so many situations where it doesn't apply, that it's like they've stripped it of meaning anyway. Your magic word isn't as magic anymore.
Yeah. And by the way, I do want to thank our subscribers. We now have enough subscribers that we don't have to fight the battles, really. Like, someone comes in there and says something, and like there's other smart people who are subscribed
Oh,
who
yeah.
pay attention to what we do, or you attack them for us, which is great. So that just certainly makes life easier. Okay, I know we want to get to these
Okay.
these things. The only other thing, there is one more thing I wanted to point out. She uses a sleight of hand here. She uses she starts with a word that's relatively innocuous sounding, like privilege, and it's easy for people to accept, like, oh, I guess maybe I have a little bit of privilege. I did go to a nicer school, or I didn't grow up, my dad wasn't in jail, or whatever it was. Like, whatever things that you have that aren't the absolute worst, you can always ascribe to privilege, right? Well, I have all my limbs and whatever. Like, okay. So she starts with a word that sounds rather innocuous. And if you let her get away with it, it's still an inappropriate word. But if you let her get away with it, she then just starts swapping that word out with other, quote, synonyms. And you're not supposed to notice that she's escalated. When she gets to this paragraph, just about right before she starts going through her list, she's going to go through the list on the next page. She starts using the word oppressor. My schooling gave me no training in seeing myself as an oppressor. Right. So now she's swapped to I'm privileged to I'm an oppressor.
Oh, they use these words interchangeably. So you will see them say privileged or oppressor, and then the flip side of that is marginalized or the oppressed. Like that.
Yeah.
That's I didn't, but they use them interchangeably, and I didn't notice she did that just because I'm so used to seeing them used interchangeably. Like they view it as the same thing. You necessarily are oppressing if you have privilege.
Right, but they don't start with the more serious word, because when you say, like, if you can convince someone, oh, you have a little bit of privilege, they might say yes to that, even though they shouldn't. Then you substitute the word oppressor, and then you start talking about, well, what should you do to oppressors? It's like, wow, you can justify a lot of bad behavior against oppressors. Oppressors are bad people, and suddenly you're in this class of people who can be vilified and spat upon and punched or whatever it is because you're an oppressor, and you've accepted it way back when you accepted the idea of privilege.
That's a great point. They start with the softer one, accept that you have privilege because other people don't, and then accept that you're an oppressor. That's a great point. Yeah.
All right, so let's get on to the meat. The fun part of this is the daily effects of white privilege. So she listed these, and she admits in this article that she wouldn't remember them if she didn't write them down, which is not surprising because they're all made up. But let's just read the intro paragraph. I decided to try to work on myself, at least by identifying some of the daily effects of white privilege in my life. So these are daily effects. I have chosen those conditions that I think in my case attach somewhat more to skin color privilege than class, religion, ethnic status, or geographic location, though, of course, all these other factors are intricately intertwined. As Keri pointed out earlier, this was prior to saying heteronormative privilege or cis privilege or whatever. As far as I can tell, my African-American coworkers, friends, and acquaintances with whom I come into daily or frequent contact in this particular time and time of work cannot count on most of these conditions. So, by the way, Keri, sorry, go ahead.
Well, that list there it's class, religion, ethnic status, geographic location. So that has now been expanded, as you pointed out. That is the basis of intersectionality. So now it's like there are all these different groups, and since 1988, they would probably add to that gender identity, size, a person of size or not. They have all these new and ever increasing number of categories because it's a social currency to now be in the oppressed or marginalized group. So people keep coming up with more groups that can be like, well, I might be privileged in these ways, but I'm oppressed over here. I have a mental illness,
Right. I'm somewhere on the spectrum, therefore, whatever. It's ruined my life. So So she's going to go through these. Now, Keri, oh, by the way, I have a quick question. Maybe someone knows this. I thought I remember like literally 10 or 15 years ago reading something about, because she mentions African-American coworkers. I thought I remember reading something about actually immigrants who were dark skinned that came into the nation outperforming blacks who were like grew up, even when you control for economic conditions, which I think at the time the article was attributing to culture, right? And which is driven by this kind of thought. So people were coming into the country with a much more individualist mindset and believing that they could succeed, and people that were caught up in kind of the American culture, especially the African American culture of, hey, we're disadvantaged, and being told by people like Peggy McIntosh that you're disadvantaged actually hurt their performance. But I don't remember it clearly. So
anecdotally, there's a great article, and I can't remember the guy's name, but we can find it and link it in the description afterwards. Who did a rebuttal? He's a black immigrant who did a rebuttal, who came here with nothing and has worked his way up to success. And he wrote a great rebuttal to Ta-Nehisi Coates, which is, and of course he's criticized as being Uncle Tom, or all these racist terms they use when a black person doesn't fall in line with SJW ideology. But we'll find it, we'll link it, because that's just anecdotally what you're saying. His whole essay is like, I came here because of the opportunity, and my other friends and I, who came from all these different countries, we're going to school, we're working during the day, and here's where we are now because I didn't see myself as a victim. Oh, you're muted.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I was muted. So let's go. This is good. That's good, Keri. You're right. Let's go through these things. There's 50 of them. And let's just remind people. So I tried to categorize them. I didn't categorize all of them, but I categorized them in categories like majority privilege, economic advantage, privilege, leftist privileged, and what was the last category? Oh, basically just like an arbitrary fantasy opinion of something that actually doesn't happen.
Wait a minute. Did you say majority privilege? Was that in there?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Because a lot of these are majority privilege.
Yeah, some of them are majority privilege, but some of them are just things that are just in her imagination. So we need to remember, she makes these 50 items, and it makes it sound like these are kind of well thought out conclusions. Let's just remind everyone before we dive in one more time. This is just her feelings about stuff. She lived a particular life as a particular individual in a particular part of the country. That life happened to be blessed, for lack of a better word. She was, very wealthy family, and what we would traditionally say privileged existence, right? And she just had some observations. These observations aren't scientific; they are meaningless. But she wrote them down and numbered them, and that apparently makes them gospel. So, number one.
Wait. One more caveat. I know we're leading up to it, but one more caveat, because I know some people in the comments are like, this guy says I'm afraid of the fallout if I posted this on Facebook. I totally understand that. And I wanted to preface this with, now, Carter, you may be shocked. I do believe in white privilege. I don't believe in white privilege the way it's used in this essay, and I don't believe in white privilege the way it's currently being used. That's why it's good to ask people to define terms. And what I mean by I believe in white privilege is that every individual is privileged and marginalized in different ways. And in certain contexts, absolutely, if you are a white person dealing with a racist who is working, I don't know, like at a gas station, and you want to buy something. There are contexts in which your white skin will help you. There are also contexts in which black skin will help you. So there are contexts. It depends. It's a contextual thing. And
I wouldn't call that white privilege. I would just say that, like every individual has different situation and can have advantages in some situations and disadvantages in others.
Exactly.
I don't know why that's white privilege.
Well, because majority privilege. I would call it that, but I would get very specific about what I mean. It's not this overarching, like everyone has this. Every white person has this privilege that's got like a card they can use, because some people are marginalized in other ways. I'm trying to speak SJW language. some people's marginalizations, all the different marginalized groups they're in, outweigh this one so-called privilege. Like, let's say I agree with SJWs, and I don't, but let's say I do. All these different, if you look at a poor coal miner, for example, all these different marginalizations in that person's life outweigh this supposed privilege that you believe he has. So that's speaking their language.
Yeah, I would recommend not speaking their language.
But
I would recommend rejecting their language, because it's a deceptive language designed to foist upon you an evil philosophy.
No. Here's the thing. I don't speak in their language as if it's truth. When I argue with them or when I talk to them, I think it's important sometimes to say, I don't agree with you on this, but using your language or using your belief system, XYZ, refute their arguments on their own level, like on their own.
You're talking about how to tactically interact with SJWs.
How to tactically interact with SJWs. That's it. Okay.
That's fine. My tactic is don't interact with SJWs. All right. Okay. So let's see. Here we go. So number 1, I can, if I wish, arrange to be in the company of people of my race most of the time. Well, obviously, by the way, my little notes here, instead of majority privilege, I just wrote not in Japan, because I spent a lot of time in Japan and I was a minority in Japan. So I know what it's like to be a white person in Japan. And so my little note just says not in Japan. So
my note there says majority privilege.
Right. That's what it is. That's a majority privilege that she's identifying. I can avoid spending time with people whom I was trained to mistrust and who have learned to mistrust my kind or me. This is just her psychological baggage. Right? This is a projection. I don't know. I wasn't trained to mistrust people of a certain skin color. I don't know that everyone else was trained to mistrust. So she's projecting a problem. And if it were a real problem, it would likely be a majority privilege problem based on like, hey, most of us look like this and these people look like that. And that's a problem. I don't experience this. I don't know. I think this is weird. This is her psychological problem. Keri, does this make sense? Does this resonate with you?
Nah, let's move on.
All right. If I should need to move, I can be pretty sure, this is number 3, I can be pretty sure of renting or purchasing housing in an area which I can afford and which I would want to live. That's economic privilege. That's called having money. That's not a white privilege thing. There's nothing white about that. Number 4, I can be pretty sure that my neighbors in such a location will be neutral or pleasant to me. I don't even understand that one. That must be projection. Keri, what is that one?
Look, I'm still caught up on this. I have to have this out with you because this is more important. This is important. This is a big.
You have to have what out with me?
Okay, we're going to go down this list, but I have to make something clear because I don't think either I'm not articulating myself correctly, and we don't understand how we're disagreeing, but hear me out.
I didn't know we were, so.
We were earlier, yes.
I definitely don't understand it if I don't know that we are.
Okay, you believe in something called majority. You believe in a majority privilege, that you can have privilege if you are the majority.
No, I don't. I wouldn't use that word. I'm just using it conveniently to mock white privilege. I would not use the word majority privilege. No.
So what would you call it? What would you call? Would you give it a term? When I'm in Japan, I don't have. If you're a Japanese person in Japan, do you have some sort of privilege by being a Japanese person in Japan?
No, you're just a normal person in Japan.
So you don't believe that there's any advantage to being a Japanese person in Japan?
Sure, there's an advantage, but it's not a privilege. It's not privilege. It's that.
What would you call it?
If I'm mistreated, it's not because everyone else is privileged. I'm just mistreated. No,
but let's call it an advantage then. I'm not talking about you as a white person.
I mean, because an advantage implies that there's something. So an advantage implies that there's a starting line and you get to start in front of the starting line. That's not what it is. There's a disadvantage, but not an advantage.
Okay, so a Japanese person is not advantaged by being Japanese in Japan, but a white person is disadvantaged by being.
Yes, I know that sounds not balanced, but yes, that's what I would argue. Because saying that they're advantage implies that there's some kind of norm that should be adhered to, and they're ahead of the game on they're ahead of it. I would say an advantage is having like Peggy, an advantage would be, well, economically advantaged would be having a family that makes way more than the average family and being able to afford a way more than the average family. That's an economic advantage, sure. But the average person in Japan isn't way more Japanese than the other average person in Japan. They don't have an advantage over the norm, over the mean, over the median. There's no advantage over the median. They're just normal.
Okay. I think we're speaking two different languages here then, because I think there's an advantage to being a Japanese person in Japan, but I don't think that means that they're starting across some starting line. I just think it means in certain contexts, life is easier because they're going to speak the language automatically.
Well, the implication, the reason I'm pushing back, Keri, is the implication that Peggy uses the word privilege and SJWs use words like advantaged. They intend them to convey moral judgments. So you're supposed to feel guilty for your privilege and guilty for your advantage. It doesn't are there circumstances?
I agree with you on that. That is
right. So I'm pushing back on the language. If we remove the morality from those terms, I would be happy to use them. But they're used in a moral context, and they're used to convey guilt or some sense of moral weight that they don't deserve. So is a tall guy advantaged over me when it comes to basketball? Yeah, but if he's average height in the NBA, I'm not going to run around saying he's advantaged. I'm going to be like, well, he's like everyone else in the NBA. He's, if there's a 10-foot guy in the NBA, well, he's got a height advantage that's immeasurable compared to everyone else, right? But, okay, fine. So I think if we can use the word advantage and remove all the moral implications from it, fine, I'd be happy to use privilege or advantage in that sense. But I think that they're too intertwined, and it's very difficult to do that, which is why I'm pushing back.
Okay. I understand that. Thank you for taking the time to try and explain that. One of the problems I have with it, and just give me a chance to try and explain this before we move on. I'm feeling rushed because I have a time limit. Okay. One of the issues I have with the way they use the term privilege, aside from its moral implications, like you say, is that they talk about it as if it is a static, universal thing that is applied across a group and not affected by these other privileges that they believe in. And so, or it's only affected by those privileges or marginalizations if it's a marginalized person. If it's a person who's in one of their more esteemed, more marginalized categories. So they don't take into account, for example, let's take a theoretical white homeless guy. They don't take into account all the various other endless number of groups that a person can be in, because it is an endless number of groups, all the endless number of marginalizations that stack up against any perceived advantage of being white in a majority white country. So that's my issue with it, is that they view it as if it's a truth, and that as if it exists in all contexts, which it doesn't. If you're in a Black neighborhood, being white, if you're in a Black neighborhood, being white is not an advantage. It's because then majority privilege is Black, and the cultural norms are you know what I mean?
Yeah. So Keri, this is we could actually get into something pretty fundamental here. I know that people view intersectionality as breaking people up, and they have this well, you have all these traits. You could be your skin color matters and your gender matters, and we're stacking all these groups that you belong to on top to define you. I actually view intersectionality a little bit differently. I view it as removing individuality and placing you in groups. So yes. They're not stripping you of things. They're not defining you by a bunch of things. They're stripping you of everything other than those things. So if you're white, that is not, there's no nuance to that. And that's the category. You're in this group. Let's say you're a white cis male, right? Christian. We'll throw in Christian because they hate Christian. So you're a white cis Christian male, able-bodied, whatever.
We're using their words, which I abhor right now, but yes.
Right. I understand. Yes. So, but that's the end of defining you. That's it. That's it for their definition of you. And whereas an individualist perspective realizes that, yes, you have many attributes. Some of the attributes may be advantages and disadvantages at times in your life, depending on the circumstances. And there are many advantages that aren't categorized by intersectionality, like you went to a better school, or you happen to be smarter, or you really know cars, and this is a mechanical problem with the car, or you
grew
in
up
Harlem
in a stable home with two parents, or you grew up
whatever it is.
Yeah.
Right. So there's in any situation there, the complexity of who an individual is needs to be taken into full account. And they abhor individualism. And so they're not actually intersectionally stacking people in a way to make these people complex. They're removing the complexity of individuals and allowing you to be defined only by membership into a predefined list of groups that's expanding, but will never expand infinitely, because if it expands infinitely, it becomes individualism. Right.
That's exactly right. It's collectivism. It's like they keep expanding these groups because there are people who are like, but hey, I'm not defined by this limited number, and because it's good to be marginalized in this belief system, let me list all the ways I'm marginalized, and so those keep becoming new categories. But like you said, it's impossible to expand that. If they did it, if it was infinite, then yes, you're just back to being individuals.
Yeah, although there's a caveat to what I'm saying. There is one direction in which it can expand infinitely. There's only many directions. I think there's only one direction in which it cannot expand infinitely.
What?
One set of directions. All of this is not about, keep in mind, none of this is about building anything. This is about tearing down that which they hate. And what they hate is Western civilization defined predominantly by white, cis, heteronormative men, Christians. So in that direction, you may not break down categories any further. But in every other direction, if you can subdivide, that's fine. It may cause a little bit of infighting on your side, but it's just more groups to oppose the evils that we want to oppose, the evil white men that we're looking to tear down. So I actually think they would be fine with individualism everywhere except for there.
Yes.
And they're going in that direction, actually.
Yeah, they are. Okay, thank you for allowing us this time to flesh this out, because I felt like I was distracted because I was thinking, anyway, let's get back to it.
Good.
I have a good half hour to get through.
48 things.
Let's pick some good ones. Wait a minute. Yes, I agree with you.
Pick some you like.
Number 3 was economic. Okay. Number 4, yeah, whatever. That's in her head.
Right. Okay, number 5 is also in her head. I can go shopping alone.
Yeah. Number 5, I can go shopping alone most of the time, pretty well assured that I will not be followed or harassed. Oh, okay. I think
that's ugly privilege, but that's a separate issue.
No,
I'm kidding. I'm making an off-color joke.
Oh, by the way, that is a new category. They do say there's pretty privilege now. Anyway,
well, there is actually some advantages in many situations to being pretty.
That's what I'm saying.
Some disadvantages as well.
Yes, I know. That's what I was trying to get at earlier with you, is there are advantages in every context. There's going to be some kind of advantage or disadvantage. Anyway, Okay.
The television. I can turn on the television. Do you want to do that one?
I can turn on the television or open to the front page of the paper and see people of my race widely represented. Now, this is what I would call majority privilege.
Not in Japan. That's what
if you are in China and you open the paper, you're going to see people of your race widely represented. Number 7, when I am told about our national heritage or about civilization, I like that civilization is in quotes as if it's not a real thing. I am shown that people of my color made it what it is.
Not in Japan.
Not in Japan. I can be sure that my children will be given curricular materials that testify to the existence of their race. Now, here's something I want to point out about this. Even in 1989, or I don't know of any curricular materials that erased the existence of other races. This is
actually
something
the only materials I'm aware that do that, the only people I'm aware that try and erase existence of races are leftists who argued for a while that race was a social construct.
Yeah, they did argue that for a while. They're not pushing that as much anymore, because now that
it works against them.
Now it works because they've pushed the trans activism angle to such a degree that if they continue to push race as a social construct, then they're going to have to let people like Rachel Dolezal legitimately call themselves Black.
Right.
Okay, so
right. Okay, where are we? That was number what?
Number 7.
7, 8. Oh no, that was 8.
Okay.
9. If I want to, I can be pretty sure of finding a publisher for this piece on white privilege. That's leftist privilege, bitch. That's leftist privilege.
Wait, that's leftist privilege, but it's also elite privilege. That's because of the class she's in. That's because of her elite status and knowing people in. Look, how many different elite universities have you been at, Peggy McIntosh? Of course, you're going to find a publisher for your piece.
Right. Yeah. I called the president of whatever country that I went to school with his son and asked him to help me get a paper published.
That's called connection privilege because I run in elite circles. Number 10.
Peggy.
Oh, Peggy. Yeah. Peggy, why don't you try writing a piece today on how your white privilege paper was bunk and see if you can find a publisher?
Yeah, well, she'll get it. Quillette will publish it. So
yeah, but not a legacy media. Okay, right. Number 10. I can be pretty sure of having my voice heard in a group in which I am the only member of my race. Now that is, I think, just an assumption. I mean, yeah. So a lot of her things like this, Keri, this is why like some of them I have in this weird category of like her fantasy world or projection. She's assuming that people don't listen to people when they're not their race. And I think that's just her projecting. I don't know if she just doesn't listen to Black people or what's going on with her, but that's not something I've experienced. Well,
and in Japan, it's not something I've experienced.
I would say 30 years later, Peggy McIntosh, in part because of this paper, which has become the foundation of, one core SJW belief. If you're in an SJW circle, this is actually the opposite is true now because you are actively told not to speak because you are white. SJWs will say, sit down and shut up. That's an acceptable thing for them to say.
Yep.
Because you're white.
Yep. And then 11 is another, this is another just self-confession of hers, right? I can be casual about whether or not to listen to another person's voice in a group in which he or she is the only member of his or her race. Like, so you're a racist? I don't understand. This is just her projecting again. That's not how I've ever treated with people of another race. I don't know people who are like, oh, I don't have to listen to that person because their skin color is different. But, hey.
Number 12, I can go into a music shop and count on finding the music of my race represented. Okay, you telling me in 1988 that you went into music shops and didn't find a lot of Black artists?
I have to be honest. I can't do this. My not in Japan doesn't work because American music was so widespread.
This one is just in her head.
I could actually find it.
Well, this one is just in it. You could go into Japan and find in a music shop in 1988 and find a number of Black artists. I'm sure.
Right.
Like that this one is in her head. But look, but there's a couple happening here in number 12. The next one is into a supermarket and find the staple foods which fit with my cultural traditions. Okay, again, that depends on context. If you were in Little Tokyo, in that context, there is no white privilege there. It's going to be Japanese foods. It depends on where you're at. This is majority privilege.
Also, ethnicity and race are not the same thing. Culture and race aren't the same thing. So
right.
That's a conflating of two terms, which they like to do when it's to their advantage, and they hate doing when it's not to their advantage. But Black people don't have one type of food. I'm sorry to say, Peggy McIntosh.
It is kind of racist to say that, I think.
It's totally racist to say that.
There's a certain.
There's no Black people food here.
Yeah.
Like, really? Wait, you're the champion of anti-racism? What? Sorry.
Number 13. Whether I use checks, credit cards, or cash, I can count on my skin color not to work against the appearance of financial reliability. Now, in 1988, in certain contexts, I agree with her on this one. I think
I would like to see evidence because I'm sure I'm sure in some situations there's context. Yeah. But I'd like to see some real evidence because, my experience having been a capitalist for decades, and granted, I was young in 1988, so I wasn't in the business world, but every waspy white person I've ever met every waspy banker. They don't give a shit. They just want to make money. That's all they care about. They just care about making money. That's it. They run the numbers. They don't care about anything else. Just money, just making money. That's the whole criticism of capitalism, that they're greedy. Well, if they're greedy, they don't give a shit about your skin color. Trust me. Now, maybe in 89, I don't know, maybe there was more of that, but
I think there was more of an assumption back then. And yes, individually, there still is, people make assumptions like that. I'm sure racist assumptions like that. But to say that that is widespread, or to say that that's just a given, I think your point is accurate.
I think those assumptions often are classist assumptions, though, and not racist assumptions. Because I did see this phenomenon in Silicon Valley, early in Silicon Valley, like not super early, but 20 years ago in Silicon Valley, when there was the first batch of nerdy engineers who had made millions of dollars. I remember having this conversation with someone who ran an art gallery, actually, and he was having to adjust himself because it was an art gallery that was on like a main thoroughfare, and they had to make sure that transient people didn't just like come and hang out in the art gallery. So they were kind of vigilant of who was walking in and be like, if you're not here to peruse art, can you leave? And so they had a problem in the past with homeless people or whatever, just kind of coming into the store. And he was telling me that he was starting to have a hard time differentiating between tech millionaires and homeless people who were coming into the store, because the tech millionaires weren't like the old clients wearing the suit and tie. They were just like in ripped jeans and a shirt and like scruffy hair and like walking in like this.
Like, have you seen is it a website or something that's like homeless or hipster? And then you just
I have not seen this.
It's hilarious. You should look this up. Homeless or hipster. Well, I saw Pretty Woman. They didn't think she could afford the clothes in Beverly Hills either. And she was white.
That's true.
The point being, yes, people are sizing up several different things. And it's not always a given that your white skin is some kind of like, credit card.
Yeah, there's also a subtle thing here that I do not want to discuss in depth on the show, but I'll just mention it for another show. There's a interesting question to me of whether using statistical analysis to draw hypotheses about an individual based on their membership in groups, that's statistically important. Like, if that's statistically valid, is that racism? It's a question that I think is a little bit subtle. Like, if you're then never going to treat them like an individual, obviously it is. But the question is, like, if you have a hypothesis immediately about like, oh, well, they're likely to be X because of these visual things that I see about them, whether it's their gender or color or whatever, if that's based on empirical data and is true, is that racism? I actually don't think that's an easy question to answer.
That'll be a great side discussion, because I have some thoughts about that as well. And
all right, let's move on. I don't want to I'm distracting us. I can arrange to protect my children most of the time from people who might not like them. I don't know what that means. Maybe that's economic privilege. I don't know what that is.
I think this is partially in our head and partially majority privilege.
Yeah.
What she's trying to say is that it's a dangerous world out there if your child is not white, and so that's the part that I think is in her head. Like, and then the other is majority privilege, which is that, and my child is in the minority. So like this whole idea about that has become accepted now, that it's dangerous to be, that cops are always out to pull over Black people for doing nothing, and then to, get a chance to be racist towards them. That this is somehow a thing that happens. Anecdotally, yes, I'm sure it has happened. I've dealt with sexist cops who came off as sexist towards me before. But I would never say generally that it is any more dangerous to be a person in this group than it is to be in that group when you're pulled over for speeding.
Yeah.
Does that
there
make
are
sense?
I mean, look, there are some systemic problems with police, but I don't think racism is one. And I know people will argue about that, but it's mostly anecdotal. The studies that they've actually done when that I've seen at least seem to dispel that there's actually racism happening on a systemic, rampant level. Are there individual instances of it? Absolutely. Yeah, there are. But that's not the same thing. All right. So where are we? Number 15, I do not have to educate my children to be aware of systemic racism for their own daily physical protection. No, you don't. No one really has to.
This is tied in with number 14.
Yeah, I can be pretty sure that my children's teachers and employers will tolerate them if they fit school and workplace norms. My chief worries about them do not concern others' attitudes toward their race. I don't think anyone in America should be chiefly concerned about others' attitudes toward the race of their child. I think this is made up.
Number 14, 15, 16 should have all been one bullet point, Peggy. Like those are all tied in together. What she's trying to say there.
Well, she needs 50 is a good number. Okay. Where are we? I can talk with my mouth full and not have people put this down to my color. I don't.
What? Okay.
Not in Japan. I mean, I don't know what. I don't know what the hell is that? Is this some are you accusing black people of talking with their mouth full? I don't know.
Yeah, I think sometimes they push stereotypes that people.
I feel like she's gonna say I can eat watermelon and fried chicken with that. Like I'm like, whoa, calm down, Peggy, with your stereotypes. What is this?
They push stereotypes. It's like that article, that SJW article that came out that said, here are 17 phrases that you didn't realize are problematic. And then they go through all of them and you're like, wow, I didn't know they were, but now you've pushed this idea out there that
you've reintroduced their problematic roots into what had been clean.
Into what was neutral. And now that's a bad thing to say. So.
Okay. I mean, 18, 19, 20, and 21, I know we have to start moving a little bit more quickly. They're all kind of the same. To me, they all fit in the same category of, here, I'll show them on the screen. They all fit in the same category of kind of non sequitur, her impressions of things, right? I can swear, it's kind of the same as her mouthful without people judging. I can swear, dress in secondhand clothes, blah, 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 without people attributing it to my bad morals or the poverty or illiteracy to my race. So again, she's just kind of assuming that we all think black people are illiterate people who have bad morals. I guess that's what this is projection, Peggy. This reveals a lot about her own psychology, frankly.
I think it does.
I can speak in public to a powerful male group without putting my race on trial. Everyone can do that. I can do well in challenging situation without being called a credit to my race. You will never be called a credit to your race, Peggy McIntosh. I'm never asked to speak for all the people of my racial group.
Okay, hold on. Here's an interesting one. Now, 30 years later, SJWs accept and push the idea that a person can speak, if they're in a marginalized group, that they can speak on behalf of the entire group, unless they disagree with the belief system.
Unless they don't want to.
Right, unless they don't want to. But often you will see SJWs saying, let's say you're disagreeing with them about something, and they'll say, but I'm a woman. And so my lived experience says this, and women feel blah, blah, blah. And they'll speak on behalf of all women. And no one elected them to do that. And the same thing for racial groups. They'll say, but black people, da, da, da. If you bring up individuals, well, hey, people are individuals. There's no one female opinion on this, and there's no one male opinion on this, and there's no one black opinion or white opinion, or, there's no one way of thinking because of your race or sex. And if you bring up individuals who don't agree with them, I know we use Candace Owens as a great example. They don't have a response to that, because they're trying to put forth the idea that there's one opinion based on race. They're really racist in this way, or there's one opinion based on sex, and they're really sexist in that way. And then anyone who doesn't fit that, who dispels this myth of theirs, that's why they get so angry at those people. That's why they call them racial epithets. That's why they call them horrible things, because those people have rejected this cult of belief and said, no, I'm not going to go along with this groupthink. And just by matter of being in a marginalized group and disagreeing with them, you prove that their entire argument is wrong, that their belief is wrong, that there's one way of thinking. Anyway,
Yeah.
that was a long little rant, but I just think it's funny how that's evolved. That it used to be that the complaint is that white people, what she's saying basically is that white people expect a Black person to speak on behalf of their race. But now they've come to a place where SJWs are like, I am allowed to speak on behalf of my race.
Right. If it's in support of social justice.
If it's in support of social justice.
I got to be honest, Keri, if I had some food, I would be speaking with my mouth full right now just to take advantage of my privilege.
How many times have I done that on Kafefi?
I can remain oblivious of the language and customs of persons of color who constitute the world's majority without feeling, in my culture, any penalty for such oblivion. I mean, not if you're in another, like, yeah, because you live in the US, you idiot. Like, you don't live in the rest of the world. Like, you can't, in China, you need to be aware of China's customs. And it doesn't matter what the customs of Zimbabwe are in China. But in Zimbabwe, it really matters what the Zimbabwe customs are and not so much what the Chinese customs are. What the hell is that one?
This is a geographical and majority privilege. Okay, I lived in Tanzania for a short time. I definitely needed to know the language and the cultural, and I had to learn them quickly. You know, don't shake hands with your left hand. That's your poo hand. Don't, they're like, don't eat with your left hand. Wear the dress. Don't wear pants. Like, wear your wrap. I took 4 years of Swahili before I went there. This is a bald-faced lie because it depends on where you're at. Anyway, it's also it belies the globalist mentality, right? Of these leftists, right? Because they are actually, even way back then, they're against nations being separate. So she's got this, like, we should just look at the earth in its entirety, and the majority members of the earth are X type of person, therefore that should matter to your daily life somehow in Nebraska. Number 23, I can criticize our government and talk about how much I fear its policies and behavior without being seen as a cultural outsider. Try being a libertarian, Peggy. I don't think you can. I don't. Do you know what this one is? I don't think she can do that. No.
Here, I'll put these back up. Sorry.
Yeah, let's put them. Oh, look. Wait a minute. I just had to say.
Oops, that's the chat. I got the chat up.
Yeah, I pulled up the chat. Third Papaya says, the ability to talk with your mouth full without judgment is such an important privilege. Thank God I was born white.
Nice, Third Papaya. See? It is an important privilege. I'm wasting it. Okay, where are we? We're on blah, blah, blah. Number 24. I can be pretty sure that if I ask to talk to the person in charge, I'll be facing a person of my own race, not in Japan. 25. Jeez. If a traffic cop pulls me over, or if the IRS audits my tax return, I can be sure I haven't been singled out because of my race. Was there evidence that this was happening? People are being singled out because of their race? I know they're being singled out because they're conservative for the IRS. I've never heard of the race. Is that a thing?
I've never heard of the race thing for IRS, but I do believe there are cops, especially in 1988, who would pull someone over presumably because of their race. So I give her this one.
I won't give her that one. I won't give her that because of the IRS, and I won't give her it about the cops without actual evidence. Because the one study that I'm aware of was the New Jersey Turnpike cops pulling people over, and when the study was actually completed, it turns out that they were actually not pulling Black people over enough, based on how much they were speeding. So
based on how much I remember you telling me about that study. Yeah.
So I don't know.
Number 26, I can easily buy posters, postcards, picture books, greeting cards, dolls, toys, and children's magazines featuring people of my race. Again, this is majority privilege. A lot of these are majority privilege. If you go to Japan, like not in Japan, you're going to be buying. Okay, I can go home from number 27. I can go home from most meetings of organizations I belong to feeling somewhat tied in rather than isolated, out of place, outnumbered, unheard, held at a distance, or feared. This is in your head. This depends on you and the individual person. And, I used to feel, I used to walk into meetings with my former business partner who I told her, because I was such an SJW then, and she wasn't really. And I was like, wow, you have the confidence of like a 60-year-old white man, because I was an SJW. And I felt like that person is the most accepted, right? And it was a lot of it was in my head. I would go into a meeting and I would already assume that they were going to be judging me because I was a woman. And she didn't walk into meetings like that. And
no, I know. I know her. I won't name her, but she did have confidence, and she didn't walk into meetings like that. And no one treated her differently because she was a woman.
Yeah. It wasn't that she had the confidence of a 60-year-old white man. That's an SJW's way of thinking.
She had the confidence of a woman who was in her 20s.
Yeah. She just had confidence. It's not the confidence of a
early 30s. Maybe,
they teach you to view yourself as either confident or not, or victim or not, based on all these factors, all these identity groups you're in, and it hurts you.
Yeah. All right. I can be pretty sure that an argument with a colleague of another race is more likely to jeopardize his or her chances for advancement than to jeopardize mine. This is projection again. I don't know what that is. And if it's anything, it would be not in Japan. I can be pretty sure that if I argue for the promotion of a person of another race or a program centering on race, this is not likely to cost me heavily with my present setting, even if my colleagues disagree with me. These are such like weird corner cases for like, what situation are you fucking talking about?
Now, this is one that is because they perceived it this way in 1988. This is one of the ones where SJWs a lot of times will say, this thing over here is wrong, so let's do the inverse. We talked about that this morning. This is one of those where they've done the inverse. Like now it's like, it's better that you present a program centering on race. Oh, yes, it's better. So they've gone over. It's like, let's stretch the rubber band way, way, way far.
Yeah. If I declare there's a racial issue at hand or there isn't a racial issue at hand, my race won't lend more credibility for either position than a person of color will have. This is the opposite exactly, Keri.
Exactly.
This is what you just said. This is the exact opposite.
The exact opposite now. So they're like, this thing is wrong. This thing that we perceive as happening is wrong, which is that white people have more credibility when talking about race. So let's create a world where the opposite is true and only people of color are allowed to talk about race. But both things are wrong. So if you believe this is happening, why would you fight for this? Why would you stretch the rubber band until it pops? Why wouldn't you find a place in the middle where anybody can talk about whatever they want and they're judged based on what arguments they make? And yes, experience plays a factor, but it's just one factor because it's anecdotal. So argumentation, lived experience, how long they've studied, expertise, how long they've studied something, all of those things matter.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry, I had a brain fart. There was something I was going to say about that, but I forgot what. Oh, I know what I was going to say. This is not me arguing. I'm just stating, I don't love the rubber band analogy because I feel like it's like there's the fallacy of the middle, like the fallacy of the middle is like, it's not about getting to the middle. It's getting off the fucking race train. Just get off the fucking race train. Stop driving the race train around. Get off the race train. I don't want an analogy well, the rubber band's here. It's got to be stretched this way, too far. There's a right amount of stretching. Like, no, let go of the fucking rubber band. It's not about race. Let go.
I like my rubber band analogy.
Yeah, I'm sure a bunch of people love it. I'm mansplaining. Okay. I can choose to ignore developments in minority. What?
As a woman, I get to tell you to sit down and shut up whenever I like.
Yes, but I don't have to listen because I'm a misogynist pig by definition. So. I can choose to ignore developments in minority writing and minority activist programs or disparage them or learn from them. But in any case, I can find ways to be more or less protected from negative consequences of any of these choices.
No, this is the inverse. It's the inverse.
Yeah. My culture gives me, actually now, if you're white and you ignore the developments in minority writing or disparage them, you're fucked.
Yeah, that's what I meant about it's completely, they've ridden I'm going to take my rubber band analogy and use your train. They've ridden the train. They're full circle on the track. The race train started here and they were going this way and they didn't realize the track was a circle and they're right back at racism.
All right. My culture, we're coming up on the one I agree with, by the way, soon. But 32, my culture gives me little fear about ignoring the perspectives and powers of people of other races. No, it doesn't. I am not made.
It's the inverse now again.
Yep. I'm not made acutely aware that my shape, bearing, or body odor will be taken as a reflection on my race. I gotta say, she thinks that like Black people are smelly and only eat the certain kind of foods and talk with their mouth full. I don't. She really is a racist.
Yeah.
Just to have this thought process and write it down is racist. Okay. I can worry about racism without being seen as self-interest. Oh, wait. Yeah, that's the next one. 34. I can worry about racism without being seen as self-interested or self-seeking. No, I mean, not really, but okay. We're going to come on the one I like, Keri. This is the one I completely agree with her about. Number 35. I can take a job with an affirmative action employer without having my coworkers on the job suspect that I got it because of my race. She is right. Only white people can do that. That is a privilege. And I think we should get rid of it. You know how to get rid of that privilege? End affirmative action. That's the only way to get rid of that privilege. It's the only way.
You and I have discussed this in other videos, but again, yeah, they've taken the racism train right back around to racism. It's the same thing.
And now she's pointing out that, but she knows it came back to racism. That's the weird thing. She's like, yeah, affirmative action. Hey, that's racist. You pushed for it. What the fuck?
Yeah,
you're the one who wanted affirmative action. Now you're back saying affirmative action is problematic because it's racist. Like, yes. Yeah, we know it's racist. We told you it was racist.
So for any SJW who may be watching, hopefully, I still hope SJWs will eventually watch. What Carter and I are trying to say is, if you set up a system where, like right now, a popular topic is men shouldn't do panels, like science panels or whatever, if there's no women on the panel. Well, I think that's stupid, because if you're a female scientist and then you get put on the panel, now you got to wonder, will they pick me because I was a woman? Was it because, and everyone on the panel is wondering, are you there because you're a woman? Don't set up that system. Just pick people based on merit. Don't pick people based on race. Again, if this thing is wrong, if picking people based on race or sex is wrong, then it's just as wrong to do it for the other, like for this race or sex. So don't do it. And you put people at a disadvantage now, where women or Black people are questioning the basis of on which they got something, except for the people who are dishonest and don't care, and they're just happy. They're happy to be there, probably because they don't deserve to be there.
Right. This hurts the best. The best people of color are hurt the most by this.
Yes.
All right, Keri. I know we're running short on time. I don't know if you want to batch some of these up, but
let's see. Okay.
36 through 42 are basically all kind of the same category to me, but
right.
If you got one you want to call out, go ahead.
If my day, week, or year is going badly, I need not ask of each negative episode or situation whether it had racial overtones. I do want to call this one out because this is true for everyone. It should be true for everyone. And what SJW, if she thinks this is wrong, if she thinks that this is something that's happening, that Black people, for example, have to look at every negative episode as if it has racial overtones, or women have to look at everything as if it has sexist overtones. If she thinks that's happening and it's wrong, why then is SJW ideology preaching that that's what we should do? And that's what it does. It tells us to look at everything through this lens of oppression, and we're being oppressed, and everything that bad that happens to me is because of sexism, and my sex is somehow involved, or my race is involved, or because of racism. It's not everything is because of oppression based on what group you're in. And so, but this one's weird to me because she's basically saying this is a wrong thing, but now they preach that. Does that make sense?
It's also like, hey, here's a piece of bad advice that people shouldn't have to follow. Yeah, they don't actually have to follow that. They never need to ask of every situation whether it had racial overtones. That was never true.
Stop doing that. Start seeing yourself as an individual.
Right. All right. I can be pretty sure of finding people who will be willing to talk with me and advise me. Yeah. I don't think that's race related to race. That's just her projecting and imagining that it can't be done.
Oh, well, she had a ton of connections too. So.
Right. Yeah. I'm pretty sure that the president will answer my phone call. That's because I'm white. No?
No,
Peggy, it is not.
I'd like to speak to the president, please. Hold on.
I don't think black people can do this. I can think over many options. So I'm sorry. Her view of black people. I can think over many options, social, political, imaginative, or professional, without asking whether a person of my race would be accepted or allowed to do what I want to do. Everyone can do that in America. I don't know where you're growing up.
I want to back up for a second. Just in the chat, Third Papaya says, I've heard lots of black folks deride whites for failing to bathe correctly. Just last week, Taylor Swift said she didn't wash her legs in the shower, and black Twitter lost its shit. And actually, I didn't know that Taylor Swift had said that, but I did see, even in my little echo chamber, I saw people asking, did white people really not wash their legs? And there's a Dave Chappelle skit where trading spouses, but they trade, like a black guy goes to live with a white family and the white guy goes to live with the black guy's family. And in that skit, it's this stereotype that white people don't use washcloths, that they just bathe with their hands.
All right. So actually, where were we? Do you remember? Advisors. Oh no. Number 39. I can be late to a meeting. See, she thinks they're late to meetings also. By the way, having worked with Keri, I can say that is not something that's only for black people.
Okay, look, sometimes, here's the other thing. We should talk about this at some point. Sometimes stereotypes are based on like averages and on truth. So when I was in Tanzania, there's this, they call it African time, right? Like African time meaning there's this cultural attitude towards, we'll get there when we get there around about this time. I naturally operate on African time, if that's the case. Like,
yes, you do.
Hey. And I know in America, there's a similar thing. They call it colored people time. But there's yeah, they do. You've never heard this?
I've never heard that. No, I've heard island time when you're on vacation somewhere. There's island time.
I haven't heard island time.
I've never heard a racial.
Yeah.
I've never heard that racial.
In the it's popular in the South, or it used to be anyway.
Oh, okay.
But I mean, it's mostly black people who use it. It's not white people who use it, at least not today. But there's also Southern time, like there.
Yeah,
Yes, and I am a Southerner, sir. So anyway.
All right, madam. Okay, so Peggy thinks that black people are late all the time. I can choose public accommodation without fearing that people of my race cannot get in or will be mistreated in the places I have chosen. Is she like 300 years old? Where are these coming from? This was 1989. That wasn't a thing. Maybe there must have been some racists that were running hotels that I didn't know about.
Well, there was a study done with Chinese Americans. And
yes.
Yes,
that I believe.
You know which study I'm talking about, and you know what's interesting about that study? I forget the guy who did it, but he had a couple, a Chinese couple, who he took them. The three of them went around the country and they tried to check in at different hotels. And that study is very interesting because what he found was that if they called in advance and said they had a Chinese couple coming, that the hotels were more often than not would they have a policy they're not renting rooms to Chinese people. But if they showed up in person, the hotel would usually more often than not give them a room. And what's interesting about that study is, to me anyway, is how a lot of times if you have an existing prejudice or a policy based on prejudice, what breaks that down? Well, like anything, person to person connections, seeing someone right in front of you. So
I do remember growing up in the 80s,
individualizing it.
Yeah. I remember growing up in the 80s, like post-Vietnam, there was the most racism that I saw from people was actually anti-Asian racism. And I grew up in a town that was mostly white, but there were a few African Americans in the town. There was no racists attitude toward them that I ever saw, but there was racist attitude towards Asians. And it was like, it grew up in this, the Rambo era of like, or the, what are some other, Apocalypse Now and all those Full Metal Jacket, all that kind of stuff was all set. It was all, all set in Vietnam, and it was all about shooting Asians basically. And so there was some Asian bias, but I never really saw it against blacks, but maybe I'm privileged where I grew up. Okay. So let's Keri, I know we're almost to 50, Keri.
Well, historically, I just want to say something about that. In this country, of course, that has existed. Of course, that racism against blacks has existed. And of course,
obviously.
Yeah, obviously. But in 1988, I'm sure there was still some of that. Absolutely. In 2019, we're still operating as if this paper, it's the basis of this whole belief system. Do you really know of any hotels that would take race into account? Any race into account?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, good point. Actually, I do in Japan. All right. Okay. I can be sure that if I need legal or medical help, my race will not work against me. I don't get that one. Are people not being treated because they're black? Is that a thing?
Well, Kamala Harris is trying to put that idea forward right now.
Remember? But that's just not true.
It's not true, but.
Okay. I can arrange my activities so that I will never have to experience feelings of rejection owing to my race. How do you know that they are owed to your race? This is again. All right. If I have low credibility as a leader, I can be sure that race is not the problem. But there were black leaders. I don't understand. Even in 1989, there was plenty of examples of black leaders. I don't know why that's a thing.
Well, this also probably goes back to the affirmative action thing too, which is that if you set up the conditions under which people can use race or gender to progress as an advantage, then you automatically set up conditions where some people are going to wonder if that's why they're in a leadership position.
Yeah, that's a great point. I can easily find academic courses in institutions which give attention to only people of my race. All right, again, that's a majority privilege. Actually, that's a Western culture privilege, right?
No, but that's the inverse now. That's the opposite now. It is hard to find.
You can't. Yeah,
any academic course which only gives attention to white people. Are you kidding me? Like,
fair.
Yeah, this is completely intersectionality. This whole belief system has said, well, this thing is wrong. So again, let's do this. Let's do it, but let's do it this way. Let's do this wrong thing.
Yeah. And I mean, the other thing, and this is just the fact is she's living in a culture that was mostly built by whites, not completely, but it's a white majority. Europe was a white majority. America was a white majority. It'd been a white majority. So most of the history will be about white people. That's not racist. That's called history. Okay, I can expect figurative language and imagery in all of the arts to testify to experiences of my race. This is a stretch, Peggy. I don't know what the hell that's supposed to mean. I can choose blemish cover or bandages in flesh color that have them more or less match my skin.
Okay.
This one bothers me a lot as a white person. No bandages that ever match my skin, ever. I'm white. I'm as white as you get. They don't match my skin color.
Especially not my Elmo bandages. It's
also majority privilege, by the way. But yeah.
It is majority privilege. There is a new intersectional Band-Aid. I don't know if you've seen this. I can't remember what it's called, but it's like True Healing or something, and it has multiracial Band-Aids.
Nice.
It's on the shelves now. I saw it at Target. But I have a personal anecdote. When I was still SJW, not that long, this is a few years ago, a friend and I were developing a documentary about the skin color privilege. It was going to be called Nude, and we were going to be focusing on like the idea that nude is racist because it's often portrayed as white. And we were talking about like crayons and bra color and band-aids and things like that. And in retrospect, it is a majority privilege thing. It's not because people don't want to make bras for Black people. It's because Black people are 13% of the population in the US. If they're making something that they're trying to match to skin tone, it's majority. But yes, as demographics change, that is going to change, and it already is changing.
Right. I can't tell how much of that is actual market pressure versus virtue signaling, but yes. Okay. I can choose. Oh, we got that one. I can travel alone or with my spouse without expecting embarrassment or hostility in those who deal with us. I mean, I don't think that happens anymore. I'm sure it did at one time. I assume that she is talking about interracial couples. Is she an interracial couple?
Or
she's not an interracial couple, and she's saying that I don't know what that is.
I'm not sure.
I have no difficulty finding neighborhoods where people approve of our household. Do you actually know if anyone in your neighborhood approves of your household? Because I've never surveyed my neighbors. I don't know what that means.
And
do you
actually,
approve of our household?
Do you approve here in Austin?
Does this mean that Black people don't have? Is she saying that only whites have like nuclear families and kids and a dog or whatever? And I don't know what she's saying.
I think that might be what she's trying to say. But the other thing is, like, this is the funny aside. Here in Austin, it's really popular for woke people to put these signs in their yard, and you see them everywhere here that say, "In this house, we believe," and then it says, oh gosh, it's like women are people. It's a whole list of SJW beliefs, and
they're practically on every lawn here as well.
Oh, Black Lives Matter. In this house, we believe Black Lives Matter, women are people, science is real. There's a whole list of them. They're there too. Yeah. So they're telling you outright, pretty much all of Austin has these signs. We approve of any and all of your families. We are good people in this house.
Right. Yes. Yeah. My children are given texts in classes which implicitly support our kind of family unit and do not turn them against my choice of domestic partnership. This again is this weird. I don't know where this stereotype of Black people is coming from. The Black family has traditionally been. I mean, I know in recent years it's fallen apart for predominantly because of state involvement, but Black family, even post-slavery, was extremely strong and nuclear. I mean, great family traditions in the Black community. What the hell is she fucking talking about? What is she talking about?
It's a racist belief of hers.
She's racist.
Yeah.
God, she's so racist. All right. I feel last one, finally. We'll show it up so you can enjoy looking at the number 50. Last one. I will feel welcomed and normal in the usual walks of public life, institutional and social. I don't feel welcomed and normal, but I think that's a psychological issue more than anything else, Peggy. You and me both. All right. So, Keri, do we want to, is there anything in the summary that we need to really talk about? She goes on. She's got a couple more pages, actually, of this stupid thing. But she doesn't really, I guess the thing that's the most important to point out is maybe this part of the next paragraph here, because this kind of reveals what her agenda is. The pressure to avoid it is great, for in facing it, I must live up to the myth of meritocracy. If these things are true, this is not such a free country. One's life is not what one makes it. Many doors open for certain people through no virtues of their own. So this just reveals that her entire goal is to tear down Western culture, any sort of remnants of capitalism.
They oppose meritocracy because it is a racist and sexist belief system. I absolutely. There's one other sentence in here I wanted to highlight towards the end. She says, disapproving of the system won't be enough. These systems won't be enough to change them. She's talking about systems of oppression. I was taught to think that racism could end if white individuals change their attitude. So she's basically saying racism can't end. It's never going to end. Like, well, that's a weird and kind of a downer belief.
Yeah, no, thank you for highlighting that. That's a great catch.
But it's necessary because it can't end if this ideology is to continue. This ideology depends on it. It is based on it. Her job depends on it.
Right.
So racism can't end for these people. They don't want racism to end. Sexism can't end.
Nope.
It has to continue. And they will find other isms.
Yeah. What I really hear her saying is racism can't end because what about my grant money? Grant money can't dry up. Yeah.
By the way, she created this thing called the Seed Project. And
yes, I read about that.
Yeah. So Seed Project has done a lot to put this ideology into schools. And yeah, that's part of the reason I think this was so impactful. And
well, let's just remind everyone though, again, which I know we said this at the beginning very explicitly, this is just the ramblings of an old lady. There's no science to this. There's no facts that are cited. There's no statistics. Some of them may have some amounts of truth. Who knows? But she didn't do anything to cite any supporting evidence. This is not academic in the sense of actually scientifically minded piece of work. This is just drivel. This is just some lady thought some stuff. A privileged white lady felt some things and wrote it down. And that's what is now passed off as intellectual thought and, establishment dogma.
It's passed off
scribblings of this racist rich lady.
And it's passed off as truth. And I would really challenge people to, the next time somebody says white privilege to you, as if this is an established fact like gravity, I would push back a little, because you can go through this list. You're allowed to have opinions about this list. There are some, as you saw, that Carter agrees with or I agree with, and there are others that we disagree. But you're allowed to have this is a list of this lady's opinions, as Carter points out, and her beliefs. And you're allowed to have opinions and beliefs about those. And so,
yeah, it's a great point. I would maybe memorize number 35. And when someone accuses you of white privilege, you can say, I just read Peggy McIntosh's white privilege article, White Knapsack, or Unpacking the Knapsack of White Privilege article. And, number 35, she makes a point that affirmative action is racist. And I agree.
You could say, which of the 50 do you agree with? They probably never read it.
Yeah.
Okay, I have to go.
You have to go. I know you have to go, Keri.
This was great. I like that we finally got through the knapsack. And
yes.
Yeah. And you guys in the chat, because we were trying to run through the list and there's 50 of them, I didn't get to pay attention as much to the chat, but I saw you guys are really active there, and I really appreciate it. I'm going to read through all this later. Yeah. Big Trouble in Little China. I don't know what that's about, but that is a great movie. Okay, I got to go.
All right. Thank you, Keri. Bye. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Yeah, we will see you next week. Like we mentioned earlier, we may end up having to change the time of Deprogrammed, but because Keri needs to eat, so she's got a job going on. But we'll see. It may shift to this time. Let us know if you didn't like the time or if you've got other times that you want, because our community is still pretty small right now. So, if you guys all want a certain thing, maybe we can make that happen. But thanks for watching and listening, and we'll see you tomorrow for Kofefi.